Growth sounds like a beautiful thing when we all first talk about it. People imagine becoming stronger, wiser, more successful, or more free. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned, and it's that growth almost always feels lonelier than you'd expect. Not because you've done something wrong, but because the path forward naturally pulls you away from what once felt comfortable. When you start growing, you quietly begin separating yourself from the things and sometimes the people who were tied to an older version of yourself. And that's not rejection, it's not betrayal, but it's simply just the way life works. The habits you used to share with others don't serve you anymore. The conversations you used to have just feel kind of shallow. And the places that once gave you joy just start to feel a little bit too small. And that transition is painful because it forces you to recognize that not everything can come with you. Think about how seasons work. Summer doesn't apologize to winter for showing up, and spring doesn't hold itself back to keep autumn comfortable. Seasons just shift because they're meant to, and growth is a lot like that. You step into a new season of life and suddenly things just start to look different. The catch is that the people around you still might be living in that old season, and you've moved forward, but they're standing where they used to be. And when you start speaking or acting differently, they don't always understand, and sometimes they'll even resist it. Not because they're bad people, but because your growth reminds them of their own stagnation. That can make you feel isolated, like you're standing in a new place, and you don't quite have a community there yet. And until you find it, growth feels less like a celebration and more like being caught between two worlds. The one that you've outgrown and the one that you're not fully settled into yet. But something that people don't want to admit is that you can't grow without cutting things away. Whether it's habits, distractions, or even certain relationships, growth requires a kind of puring to yourself. What's actually happening is a clearing. You're making space for something stronger to take root. When you cut back a plant, it looks smaller and weaker for a moment. But given time, it grows back healthier than it was before. And that's the same with you. When you let go of old attachments, you may feel emptier for a while. But you're actually preparing room for something much deeper. And this process feels lonely because nobody celebrates pruning. People only notice the final bloom. But the in-between stage, the quiet nights, the distancing, the choices that others don't understand, that's where the real growth is happening. And one of the hardest truths is that not everyone in your life is meant to walk with you into every season. And some people were only there to teach you something specific. Some relationships were never built to last forever, and others might still care about you deeply but simply can't align with where you're going. It's tempting to drag people with you and to try to force them to grow at your pace, but that usually backfires because growth isn't something that you can hand to someone else. It has to be chosen. And if someone's not ready, you end up slowing yourself down and trying to convince them. Loneliness also shows up here because letting go hurts, and it makes you wonder if you're abandoning people, if you'll ever find new ones who truly understand you. But that space that you're creating is completely necessary, and without it, you'd never have the chance to meet those who are aligned with who you're becoming. Another reason growth feels lonely is because it often strips away the noise that you rely on. You don't have the same group of friends hitting you up every night, and you don't find comfort in the same routines, and suddenly you're just sitting with yourself more than ever. That silence can be extremely uncomfortable, but it's also the test. It asks, can you sit without filling the gap with distractions? Can you stand firm in who you're becoming, even when no one else is clapping for you yet? Loneliness during growth isn't a punishment. It's preparation, and it's teaching you how to walk with strength and clarity even before the world notices. So yeah, growth feels lonely because it naturally separates you from the old while you haven't fully stepped into the new. It's pruning, it's letting go, it's walking through seasons where others don't understand you. But that loneliness isn't proof that you're failing. It's proof that you're moving. If you feel like the path is getting narrower, that's normal. The narrow path always feels empty at first. But emptier doesn't mean worse. It means it's being cleared for something greater to take root. So here's the thing. I don't have it figured out, and I'm not saying this from some place of authority like I cracked the code. I'm just in the middle of it too, and maybe that's why it feels worth talking about. Because I think a lot of us are trying to grow, but none of us really expected it to feel this lonely. When you're younger, you kind of imagine growth like a movie montage. You see yourself putting in work, leveling up, and you've got these group of people around you cheering as you rise. But real life doesn't play out that way. It's slower, quieter, and way less glamorous. Most of the time, it feels like you're walking down a road where fewer and fewer people are around. And you're like, wait, is this supposed to be happening? Did I do something wrong? And I talked about this a bit earlier, but something I've noticed is that once you step into that new season, you don't instantly find new people who get it. And there's this awkward gap where you've outgrown your old environment but haven't found your new one yet. And that gap is where loneliness really hits, and I'll catch myself wondering, what if I never find people who actually understand where I'm heading? And it's a real fear, but maybe that's part of the process, and maybe you're supposed to walk alone for a little while so that when you do meet those people, you actually recognize them. You can tell the difference between someone who's just convenient to hang around and someone who's genuinely aligned with what you're doing. Doesn't mean I've figured out how to handle that weight perfectly. Honestly, I'm still very impatient, but I'm starting to believe that just because community takes longer to build doesn't mean it isn't coming. And here's something I wrestle with. When growth feels isolating, it's super tempting to just go back to what's familiar. Even if you know it's not good for you anymore, at least you're not alone, right? And I've done that before, slipped back into old habits, old conversations, old circles, just because it felt safer than being myself. But every time I end up realizing that safety is temporary. Deep down I know I can't stay in the same old season forever. It's like wearing clothes you've outgrown. They kind of fit, but not really, and you're constantly uncomfortable. So maybe the loneliness is there to push us forward, and to remind us that as hard as it feels, going back is not the answer. And another thing that's been hitting me is that growth forces you to get comfortable with yourself. When the noise dies down and people aren't around as much, you're left with your own thoughts, and honestly that can be kind of scary. But maybe that's the point. Maybe part of growing is actually learning to be okay with your own company. To not always need distraction or validation. And I'm not saying I've mastered that, I'm not far from it. Half the time I'm still reaching for my phone or trying to fill the silence. But I think the loneliness is slowly teaching me that if I can stand strong alone, I'll be way more ready to stand strong when I'm with others. Something I keep circling back to though is this. What if loneliness is not a sign that you're failing, but a sign you're actually on the right path? Because think about it. If you were just doing what everyone else is doing, you probably wouldn't feel as isolated. You'd blend in, but when you decide to take a different route, of course it's going to feel thinner. I'm trying to shift my perspective here actively, actually, and instead of seeing loneliness as proof that I messed up, maybe it's proof that I'm moving somewhere new. Maybe it won't always feel this way. Maybe the loneliness is just this transition period before something fuller arrives. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying all this because I have answers. I don't. I'm saying it because I feel it too, and maybe you do as well. Maybe you've lost friends who don't understand where you're going, and maybe you're sitting in that weird in-between where you're not who you used to be, but you don't quite know who you're becoming either. If that's you, then we're in the same place. We're figuring it out together. I don't know when it gets easier, and I don't know when the loneliness breaks. But I do know this, is that growth that feels lonely is still growth. And maybe that's enough for now. So yeah, growth feels lonely, but loneliness does not mean you're lost. It just means you're in motion. Maybe it's less about rushing to fill the gap and more about learning to carry it for a little while. Trusting that the right people, the right environment, will meet you further down the road. Until then, we keep walking. Not because it feels good all the time, but because deep down, we know the road that we left behind can't take us where we're meant to go.